Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Jonny Villegas Wash Process Peru from Say Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And first things first, this is a geisha, which makes it our first ever Peruvian geisha review on this channel. And that gives me an opportunity to discuss this variety a little more in general, as I hold some very strong opinions about the geisha variety. The first thing I wanted to address was the notion of this geisha tax, which simply put states that anytime you're purchasing a coffee of the geisha variety, then you can expect to pay a little more, and oftentimes as a result, you're a little underwhelmed by the coffee in general. This is something I don't necessarily subscribe to, as more often than not, I feel like the geisha variety is, well, better than its origin contemporaries. So as a result, some of my favorite coffees from, let's say, Panama or Honduras in general have been of the geisha variety. But with that being said, it doesn't necessarily live up to its variety contemporaries, as more often than not, even though I'm impressed with those coffees, I'm not quite as impressed with them as I am with the Panamanian geisha, which for me is the gold standard of coffee in general. Anytime there is an origin that does offer a wash processed geisha, then it is something that catches my interest. So as you can imagine, this Peru definitely caught my eye. It very much sounds like my flavor profile sort of coffee. Looking forward to discussing it and seeing if it lives up to the expectation. This right here is day 26 of this coffee. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I liked this one slightly better through the Chemex, and we'll get into why that was a little later, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for Say is an American light. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14. First impression, and a very Say-like first impression, as it had so many of those citric components right from the start. However, there was also plenty of vibrancy to the cup as well, and it didn't necessarily remind me of a Peru, which oftentimes can be maybe a little bit more chocolatey and nutty, but that was of course kind of expected given both Say's roast profile as well as the variety that was from this coffee. There was an abundance of really strong florals, and as a result, it left a pretty strong first impression. But if you would have put this on a table for me and asked me to name the origin, Peru definitely wouldn't have been my first choice. Day 16 was seeing noticeable improvement to the cup already, as it had plenty of wild, lighter fruit characteristics to it. Slightly less citric, but rather more of the softer, fleshy fruits. And they had a ripe stone fruit flavor note listed on here. Yes, that was in somewhat significant abundance on day 16, but we would definitely see more of that throughout this coffee. Florals, relatively vibrant once again, and it was a quite enjoyable experience. Day 18, another great day for this coffee, as the higher brewing temperatures was yielding some wonderful stone fruit-like peachiness from the cup, especially as it had cooled down. That's why I like the higher temperatures. I typically don't like pushing it above 208, so that's typically as high as I go for coffee. But as a result, I was seeing a significant amount of sweetness and a delightfully pronounced florality to the cup, and I was seeing it improve a lot. Day 20 lowered the temperatures to kind of see if it was maybe just a little bit of the resting of the coffee or if it was the adjustments with the temperature, and I definitely noticed a lot more of a muted like cup of coffee in this sense, as a lot of the strong and vibrant florals and fruits in the cup weren't quite as present on this day, so I definitely felt like the biggest adjustment being the temperature was what caused this to happen. Quite a bit of lingering and lasting citrus in the cup as well, so not quite as good, but went back on day 22, and one huge note I have on here is that this coffee can definitely be described as what a lot of people would describe for Say's coffees, grassy. This is probably the most grassy cup of coffee I've ever had from Say. It is very, very light, and as a result, I would say that oftentimes there's a fair bit of lemongrass in this cup of coffee. There were numerous amount of positives, so that was kind of counterbalancing that, including that really strong sweetness as well as vibrancy that was coming from in general. So I didn't mind the grassiness. I know it's a turnoff for a lot of people in the same sense of roastiness is a turnoff for a lot of people. Same side of, well, two sides of the same coin. Day 24, best day of the coffee to this point and the most vibrant it's been. Still kind of grassy with a long-lasting sweet citrus finish, most reminiscent of lemon candy. I mean, that's pretty common for me. I say that with almost every single Say coffee, that if it doesn't have a citric flavor note on the box itself, then you can expect citrus in the cup anyway, as almost all of their coffees come out pretty citric for me in general. A lot of really pretty white flowers though, and more subtle stone fruit. Very pretty cup. That's the best way I could describe it on this day, was just quite pretty. Day 25, another improvement to the cup, and this time it was brewed through the Chemex. So that's kind of the difference, is I'm saying brewed through the V60 it's a little more pretty, and brewed through the Chemex it's a little bit more vibrant. But most distinctly, I was getting a lot of the fleshy fruits as it had cooled down. I was getting so much of the peachiness when run through the Chemex and letting the cup of coffee cool down. That was the most amount I had experienced of this cup of coffee. But yeah, again, a lot of the floral and grassy components to the cup of coffee, which at this point was pretty common and repetitive and to be expected. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and we have a lot of level 4s, and I do want to emphasize on this that a lot of these are on the high side of the level 4. So let me run through them real quick, and first thing we have is the cleanliness. And I think in theory, yes, I could have definitely pushed this one up to a level 5, but I usually love saving that level 5 cleanliness for something that is just squeaky clean as possible. This one's extremely clean, but not quite as much as a lot of the Panamanian geishas that we've reviewed on this channel, and even some of those washed Ethiopians, so I have to leave it at that level 4, but it's really close to that level 5. The finish. Again, that's on the higher side of the level 4. I mean, it has that very lasting kind of citric finish that I expect from so many of Say's coffees, so it's definitely there, but it's also a little bit of a softer finish, so level 4 there is justified. Sweetness, this is one of the sweeter cups of coffee I've had from Say in general, so that one's also on the higher side of the level 4, but it's not overly abundantly sweet, so I have to leave it there on that level 3. The acidity, on the level 4. The acidity, also at a level 4. This might be the most acidic cup of coffee I've reviewed on this channel in general. It's really close, so it's definitely also on the higher side of the level 4, but I don't know, I just felt a little more comfortable leaving that one on that level 4. The florals, they're right there, they're perfect at that level 4. I wouldn't push them all the way up to level 5. There are a lot of white flowers in this cup of coffee, but not overly as abundant as some other flavor notes in this cup, and those of course being the citrus, which I've mentioned. There are some more citric cups of coffee I've reviewed as well, so that one's probably on the slightly higher side of the level 4, but again on the level 4. And then the stone fruit, that's like perfect on the level 4, especially with the Chemex, especially as the cup of coffee has cooled down. I know that this tasting wheel was made with the Chemex, so I'll keep that in mind. Saltiness at level 3, I mentioned there's quite a bit of lemon, that's where I'm getting a lot of the saltiness from, as well as a slight bit of bitterness. Caramel I have at a level 2 because I can't underemphasize that there's a very slight candy sweetness to this cup of coffee. Oftentimes I link it to that like lemon candy, but even then it's a little bit more sugary sweet in that sense, so I put the caramel a little higher. And then the body at level 3, that's kind of interesting, especially for what it is and especially for the brew method that it was made with. And I think that's what kind of separates it from other geishas in general, is that oftentimes when you do plant something like this in a South American country, then as a result you might get a little bit more body than you would get from a Panamanian geisha or an Ethiopian geisha. So as a result, yeah, the body's a little higher than I think I would have expected, but I actually do quite agree with it at the level 3 mark. Lower side of the level 3 for sure, but I just kind of wanted to emphasize that in the tasting wheel. For the most part, I think this is a pretty accurate representation of what I was experiencing, but it was just very hard to chart considering that a lot of these were on the higher side of the mark that I actually put them on. But I think this does a pretty good job of showing what I was getting from this cup. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's kind of everything I said going into this video. This is probably one of the best Peruvian coffees I've ever had. It didn't really act like a Peruvian coffee, but when compared to its origin contemporaries, it's significantly better. When compared to its variety contemporaries, so the Panamanian geishas, it's not quite as good. But even with that being said, I think this coffee will probably end up in my top 10 coffees of the year list towards the end of the year because, well, it is a different variety. So this one, it is a different origin. So this one's a Peru. So it's going to be in the Peru category, which on itself should make it finish pretty high, especially for that origin. But with that being said, I really loved the peachiness that was coming from this cup of coffee. I loved the cleanliness, I loved the sweetness, and I've always said that as long as you're kind of balancing those things out with the acidity, then I won't mind a higher sort of acidity in this cup of coffee. It was unique in its own sense. When you're going to have a lot of peachiness in a cup of coffee, I'm really going to enjoy it. There's some other stone fruits, a very slight bit of, actually it was quite pronounced, mango as well. So a lot of sugary stone fruits in this cup of coffee, a lot of vibrancy and a lot of sweetness, which is going to make it something that I'm going to really enjoy every single time. So I want to say, even if this one's really, really light, I just couldn't help but really be impressed by how this one turned out. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. You really need to like your acidity, keep that in mind, and keep that citrus in mind. If you really like those two things, then everything else that comes from it is an additional benefit, because I found those to be the best aspects of this cup: the sweetness, the cleanliness, as well as that stone fruit component that was coming from it, and the florals. Those are very much my sort of things when it comes to a cup of coffee, and if you're that same sort of person and you don't mind the very strong citric acidity, then I think that this will be a great fit for you as well. But for the most part, I think this is the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well, or if you've had any Peruvian geishas, because I mean, this was my first experience and it was a pretty positive first experience. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Jonny Villegas Wash Process Peru from Say Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.